Hello everybody and welcome back to Beyond Horizons. In the last episode we launched the interplanetary vessel Nyx, which was going to take some of the cargo for our Eve mission, but alas we had to use some of the fuel that it needs to get to Eve to circularize its orbit around Kerbal, so we are sending up a refuel mission in about the most complicated and painstaking way I could have decided to do this. Say hello to Maelstrom, which has been spelt wrong, and I didn't actually notice this until I brought it back down, and my girlfriend came and looked over my shoulder and said, I think you've spelt Maelstrom wrong. I'm missing the R, so it actually says Maelstom. And stom in Dutch means stupid, so that's rather fitting. Anyway, it's supposed to be a refueling SSTO. It has a big fuel tank in its cargo bay there. Fuel that it's not allowed to use for its ascent, which actually makes it very hard to fly. As we'll see later on, the fuel balancing isn't perfect. I actually had to allow it to use some of those fuel reserves to get into orbit because it's just a little bit too heavy to get there under the fuel that it is permitted to use. So unfortunately, we can't do a full refuel and we have to send up another mission after this one. But yeah, I decided to refuel this before we send up the cargo, just so there's fewer parts on the vessel, so it runs a bit smoother. It's already running quite slowly because both of these vessels are quite complicated. Luckily, the docking goes pretty much without a hitch, using the tried and tested method of pointing the vessels at each other to minimise the complications of the manoeuvre, and yeah, we get a pretty nice easy docking there. Once we're docked, it's time to start the slow process of refueling everything. Luckily, you don't have to watch that in real time, but this did take quite a while, just finding every single fuel tank and making sure that I haven't missed any. Also, the actual refueling process obviously does take a while as well, and unfortunately, we didn't refuel the entire way, so yeah, we have to send up another one of these just to, well, get the rest of it refueled. Now that we are pretty much completely out of fuel in the Maelstrom, it's time to head back to the runway. I did conserve the tiniest amount of fuel in the refueling process just so that we had enough to deorbit, but we really don't have much after that. We definitely don't have enough to fly back to the runway if we overshoot. And place your bets now whether I overshoot or not. I think if you've been watching this series for any amount of time, you don't even need to guess. You know I overshoot the runway. You'd think after all the space planes that I've been through in this series that I'd sort of figure out how to aim better than I can, but nope, I haven't learnt my lessons yet. I do find it difficult when I have a new space plane because I'm not always sure of its flight characteristics, especially on re-entry, so yeah, I'm not very good at aiming with a new space plane. But overshooting the runway was the least of my problems. You can see here I'm now starting to look at all the fuel tanks and trying to pump the fuel forward because I was starting to get the, a little bit of oscillation, and I thought, I don't know how stable this thing is. And you can see it's pitching up there a lot. That's not me doing that. That's the space plane's natural tendency. And yeah, there we go. I completely lose control. We start somersaulting through the upper atmosphere. And I've been in this situation more than enough times to know that it's now it's time to frantically scramble and get all the fuel as forward as possible. Now, the problem is the most forward-facing fuel tank is the cargo one, mainly for refueling, which is still pretty near the center. So it was very hard to get that center of mass forward again. Now, once we start dipping below those, super sonic speeds, then we start getting a bit more stability, and there we go, now we're flying forward. But now I actually have the opposite problem. Now this thing is too nose heavy. So I try and pump the fuel backwards, as far back as it will go, but it's not enough, unfortunately, and we still are nosing down. And I'm trying to pitch up as much as I can, and I can't, so I wait till I'm a little bit lower and I deploy the drogue chutes to try and help give me a bit more control at the back there, and it seems to work. I've got my RCS on there as well, and luckily that all works and we managed to put it down in the ocean without killing any of the Kerbals. But yeah, that was a complicated approach, fraught with disaster for what should have been a relatively simple refueling mission. So naturally, I did the exact same mission a second time. Okay, it's not actually the exact same. I did make quite a few amendments to the plane before launching it again. The main problem I realised I'd made in the first iteration is that when I was checking the fuel balancing, I'd empty all the fuel out of the plane to see where the centre of mass would end up, but I didn't do that for the actual refueling tank in the cargo bay, so the centre of mass was not where I thought it was going to be on the way back down. So I rejigged it around a little bit to make that a bit more accurate so that we don't crash into the ocean on the way back down. I also try to add a little bit more fuel for the actual plane so that we don't have to dip into the cargo fuel just to get into orbit, but it didn't really work then either. I still had to do that, so I think it's just not a very efficient way to move all that fuel into orbit. I tried to help a little bit by having less Kerbals in the cockpit. I realised on the last flight I had 4 Kerbals in there, which isn't really necessary and just adds a little bit of extra weight. I think the choice of cockpit wasn't the best either because the Mark III one there is quite heavy. I know on like the Galahad and Bismuth I actually just used a inline Mark I cockpit on a like an adapter piece just so that there's only one seat for the cockpit and that cuts down on weight significantly, which I probably should have done here as well, but I just love the look of the Mark III cockpit. Oh, and of course, the most important change, arguably, that I made is correcting the name on the side and the wing. I managed to put the R in so it actually says Maelstrom instead of Maelstrom. But despite all of those amendments, it still wasn't very fun to fly, and I don't think I'll be using the Maelstrom again. Unfortunately, the docking this time was not nearly as smooth as the last one. You can probably see already that I'm coming in at a bit of a weird angle, and I don't think I noticed until too late, and then I bump into it, and then I spend a very long time trying to readjust my my pitch, and in doing so would knock the vessel, the Nix, which would push it away, so I was again in the wrong orientation, so I'd have to turn it again knocking the Nix, and it was a bit of a cyclical process there. So eventually I just come away and come at it with a fresh new approach and eventually get the docking. But yeah, it was quite a painful one. So it was quite a difficult and painstaking way of approaching this sort of mission, but hey, at least we fully refueled the Nix, right? Well, unfortunately, no, not quite. I was a hair's breadth away from fully refueling this thing, which was so annoying, but I figured we're less than a unit away in each tank, so it's probably not that big a deal. If we don't make it to Eve because of that one unit that's missing, I'm going to kick myself. Anyway, it's time to bring the Maelstrom back down for a second time. Yeah, I know I've got the same mission twice in a row in an episode, and generally I try to avoid that. I think it get a bit, a bit boring to watch the same thing over and over, and so I try to put things in between just to spice it up a little bit and give it some variation, but unfortunately I don't really have any clips to put in between because the next few missions are also centered around the Nix, which all occur after these missions. And at the time, this is all I was working on. So I do apologize if it is a bit boring, but hopefully you've enjoyed watching me fumble this space plane into orbit twice in a row. Anyway, now it was time to test and see whether my rebalancing of the center of mass and center of lift worked. And not really. I think you can see here we're still nosing up during re-entry, and I'm pumping the fuel forward, but we really don't have much fuel to pump, so it doesn't really change a whole lot. But then once we leave like those re-entry speeds and we get down to subsonic, then we start nosing forwards again. So I'm not sure whether that's just something to do with like the the dynamics at supersonic speeds compared to slower speeds, but again, I have the same problem where now I'm nosing down, and so I have to pump the fuel backwards, and again, we don't really have much fuel to do that, but luckily, it seems to just about work. And I'm not far from the runway, so I give it my best go to fly back, but yeah, we have literally a drop of fuel. What's that say, like 2 meters per second left of delta V, which is just not enough. And we don't have enough energy to glide back to the runway, so back in the ocean we go. Luckily, it's not as much of a panic as it was last time. We don't have to rely on the drogue chutes to keep us pointed in the right direction, because we actually have some aerodynamic control. So yeah, we land in the water pretty easily, if not a bit hard, giving our crew whiplash. But yeah, there's the Maelstrom. Take a good look at it, because you'll probably never see it again. It was just an absolute pain, and my next refuel missions will probably be done in a much easier way. As a side note, I do actually have footage of me designing the Maelstrom, so if that's something people are interested in seeing, just let me know in the comments and I can upload that. So the focus of today's episode is the Nyx vessel, and this is the next part, so we are actually going to load up the cargoes, and we're starting with Zagreus. I probably could have launched this on the Hermes launcher, the new one, but I was still in the test phase when I was launching this, and I wasn't really too happy with its performance. Like I said, sometimes it was performing very well, and other times it would just completely break apart when it came back, so I thought this would be just cheaper and safer to do a normal booster that's disposable. That way I don't have to really worry about it. Now you can see I've got it mounted on a frame there. That's supposed to be like the re-entry frame to basically hold the heat shields in place. I haven't actually tested to see if this works, so hopefully it does. Hopefully it doesn't destroy the plane on the way back down, but in the event that it does, I have decided that the crew will be sent down to the surface in just like a drop ship, like a little capsule rather than the plane. Yeah, just in case the re-entry of this vehicle doesn't go all that well. And this dropship will actually contain the Hypnos rover with it as well, so when they get down there they have a means of getting about and they don't have to wait to be picked up by a plane that might never make it to the surface. But hey, let's not be pessimistic about it. I have designed this kind of, I'd like to think sensibly. I've put some ore tanks in the front so that it will go forward first into the atmosphere, and the frame itself splits in the middle because those heat shields have a lot of drag when they're deployed, and in Eve's thick atmosphere I don't want them flying back into the plane and destroying it in the upper reaches of Eve's atmosphere. So hopefully by splitting it in the middle it gives it a chance to separate cleanly. But anyway, here we are, the docking is finished and we're getting a bit closer to finishing this vessel. On to the final mission for this episode. We're completing the Nyx vessel with its final bit of payload with Deepstar 3. Similarly to Zagreus, it has an untested re-entry frame, which, well, I guess we'll see if it works or not. It might be a bit harder because the submarine is a lot heavier than the plane. And I was feeling brave and decided to launch it with Hermes because I don't really like using the disposable launchers. They feel a bit wasteful, and if I can get this to work well, then why not give it a good go? So we've got another docking to yammer over, and I thought I might talk about a research topic that I have for my university project, where I'm looking into whether time is an emergent property of quantum physics or not. And I stumbled across a very interesting theory of quantum mechanics called Cordus theory. And to boil down weeks worth of reading into a couple of seconds, the idea behind Cordus theory is that every subatomic particle is comprised of a one-dimensional cord, or like a rope, and that has reactive ends which emit forces in 3 dimensions. And I know, it sounds like pure conjecture, and it is pure conjecture. It has no mathematical formalization, it's just more of a conceptual argument to kind of help understand why things occur the way they do in quantum physics. But it would offer nice explanations as to a lot of properties of quantum mechanics, such as entanglement and superposition of a particle. So, if, for example, how can a particle be in 2 places at once? Well, if it's a one-dimensional cord with 2 reactive ends, then it is actually sort of in 2 places at once. And so Cordus theory puts forward that time, as in the ticks of time in inverted commas, come from what they call the re-energization of this cord. So as this cord vibrates and oscillates as a wave, every time it resets its phase, that is 1 tick of its own internal clock. And what that means is if you get a coherent system, all of these chords kind of sync up, and so their clocks become synchronized, whereas if you have a decoherent system, as in entanglement is breaking down, then suddenly there's no unified tick anymore, and that can lead to things like time dilation, which, you know, is something we require of our theories of quantum physics. Like I said, there is no mathematical formalization for this theory, and it is also a deterministic theory of quantum physics, which, you know, evidence comes to suggest that quantum physics is not deterministic and is rather probabilistic. Even if you use a probabilistic framework of quantum mechanics, you still draw the conclusion that time is an emergent property of evolving quantum states, and if you look at something called Page-Wooter's formalization, then time simply becomes how one quantum state, or not even necessarily quantum state, changes with comparison to another. And that is kind of the important point, is that it has to be in comparison to a different clock. Anyway, enough about quantum physics. We have Deepstar 3 docked with Nyx. Our grand expedition to Eve draws ever closer to being completed. Now that Nyx is ready, we have to turn our focus onto the ascent vehicle from Eve's surface, as well as the surface base. Obviously, our Kerbals need somewhere to sleep while they're down there, and we also need the dropship. And I've got an orbital transfer vehicle that will all be coming up in future episodes. To wrap up today's episode, let's take a quick look at the return of the Hermes launcher. I mentioned before that sometimes it would break apart when it fell into the ocean, and I thought I'd just give you a nice example of that happening. The problem is that I'm trying to hit the retrograde marker, which means it twists a lot every time I fire the engines, and I just came into the ocean at a bad angle, so I have a bit of learning to do with flying this thing. But that's everything with today's episode. Sorry that it was all focused on Nyx, but hopefully the next episode will see a bit more variation. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like and maybe even subscribing to the channel. And if you want to catch up with older episodes, you can check out the playlist that this one is in. But I've been Moonfish1001, and I'll see you in the next video.